Then let me share my screen so that we can get started talking about the aroids, or this group of plants that you have seen a few of the specimens in class. And I want to share with you a photograph of the very large lacy tree philodendron, so the one we saw earlier. So I mentioned that it could get quite big. And so this one has now taken over the entire yard. So it gives you an idea how big they can get. And flowers for that specific plant. So the one that we saw was not flowering, but these are how the flowers are going to look. They're going to be big. If you look inside, you may be able to find it if you happen to be there during the right time. And here's a close-up of the flower that we get to dissect it later on so that you can understand what's happening, because it may look somewhat weird. But we are going to be talking about the Araceae. That is going to be the family name for what sometimes is referred to as the Arum family, because that's where the type specimen came from. And then as a general name for members of this family, they are sometimes referred to as aroids. That's a general way of referring to them. So if you don't know the name and you know that it is in this family, most likely you can say it's an aroid, and that's probably correct. So we're going to show you the map with the different distribution, or the distribution for members of this entire family. So remember, we're looking at the family level now. You've seen the family levels, that some of the members are going to be the philodendrons, and also the ZZ plant will fall into this category. So those are the individuals that are going to be making up the family, this family group. And then we'll see other specimens as the semester progresses. So we have the distribution. So we got mainly in the tropical areas. So when it gets too cold or into temperate areas, it is not present because it is primarily a tropical plant. It is a monocot. So if you don't know, there are two main groups of plants, flowering plants, the monocots and the dicots, the broadleaf, narrow leaves. So this will be in the monocot category. We'll talk about that more later on. And so far we have 100 genera. A genera is plural for genus. The genus would be Philodendron. That is a genus. So that is the first name out of that hoity-toity botanical name. So we have Philodendron, that's one. We have Samioculcas, the ZZ plant. That will be two genera that are found within this family group that you have already seen. And so there's 107. Obviously, we're not going to see 107 because those are not all of them are going to be in cultivation. And actually, we can add Monstera. That would be a third genus in this family. And now, just more or less, they're estimating about 3,700 species found within this family. So this will become a small family. So if I were to take you on a trip to South America, this is Aroids, the Dieffenbachia, growing in the wild. Here you can see them as a swamp type plant. So it's a river that at certain point there will be a tide or some kind of tide that will bring the water higher. So you can see the line where the plant gets covered with water, and you see the line of the mud. And so each day they will get flooded, and then the water is going to recede and go away, and then you can see the photograph that you see right now. So water loving. The word epiphyte, I've used it before, and this is one word that you need to know because we're going to see this type of habit in many, many plants. So epi means upon, and phyte or phytum means plant. So these are going to be plants that grow on top of other plants, and usually it's going to be trees. Now, they are not parasites. because they are not really taking any resources from the plant. They're not connecting to the vascular system. They're not stealing anything. They're just hitching a ride, or they're just piggybacking on the limbs and or the branches of other plants. So many years ago, millions of years ago, there was a niche. There was an open area. There was a lot of trees. Nothing was growing on top of them, and a few plants decided to take advantage of those open spaces and allow them, which allowed them to be higher in the canopy of the forest and be able to bask themselves in sunlight. And so other individuals copy, and now we find this method of growing in many different plants and many different plant families. So the staghorn fern that we've seen before, that is an epiphyte plant. Uh, the dendrobium orchid, that is an epiphyte, and a few of the other plants that we'll see later on. So here's a photograph of a philodendron growing on a very high up on a tree. And you see some of the stems that have rotted and they're gone, and you have some of the roots that are going to be dangling or reaching towards the ground. If we look from the bottom, that's how it looks. All you see are the roots that just keep reaching towards the ground, and eventually when they hit the ground, that could be 60, 70, 80 feet in length. Then they'll root and they'll get some water and some vitamins and minerals for the plant that is going to be way above that. So not all epiphytes are going to send out all these roots, but they're going to be living on top of the plant. When we take some closer photographs, this is what we're going to see. This is the genus Anthurium. We'll get to see it later on, but right now I can show you some photographs. And then as time goes by, the plants are going to mature, and then you may see the flowers. In the wild, it's not too common to see them in flower. Excuse me. But here's the flowers, which means that this is an adult plant. And that is another very important thing to point out with this family, that just like we saw, and I pointed out with the creeping fig, the philodendrons or members of this family, aroids, may exhibit those two types of leaves, the juvenile versus the adult. So on the right side, we have a heart-shaped leaf type philodendron. The juvenile, variegated, just climbing up to the side of a tree, trying to reach the sunlight. On the left, we have now a much older individual that the leaves are going to be bigger. It's flowering, so we know that's an adult, and it has reached the top of the canopy. So now it's able to turn into an adult and now flower and carry out the rest of its life. So you may see some difference, serious or big difference between the juvenile and the adult. The juvenile, the leaves are going to be nice, small, and cutesy. The adults are going to be large, like the philodendron that we saw. And when we see a close-up of the stem, you see the stem is out here, and the roots are just wrapping around, just clinging on to the bark of the tree. Could they take the water that may be dripping from the tree? Yeah. Can they take some rotten debris that may be providing them with vitamins and minerals? Yeah. Or also they're just holding on because they're trying to climb, and they're going to support themselves by having all those roots wrapped around the tree. We've seen the lazy tree philodendron, Philodendron cellulum. We saw it already. And here is the flower, or just a generic flower. So I always recommend you need to learn this flower. You need to be familiar with this flower. You need to know at least the basic part of this flower. And I'm saying this is a generic flower because, as we are going to find out, many plants are not going to look like this. However, some of the main components are going to be there, but just a little bit modified. So we have an area called the receptacle that is going to provide an area for other parts to go out. We may have sepals and petals. Those are going to be the showy part of the flower. You might see them, the colorful parts, so the sepals and the petals. So those may or may not be present. And then we're going to have what is referred to as either the male or the pollen producing component. That is going to be the stamens. That is going to be made of the anthers that will produce the pollen, and the filament, which is going to be the tiny stem attaching itself to the anthers. So collectively, the anthers and the filaments are going to generate what is known as the stamen of the plant, which is the pollen producing component. And on the opposite side, we're going to have the egg producing component, or the female part of the plant, for a lack of better description, which is going to be made up of the stigma. The stigma is going to be the site where the pollen is going to be deposited. And the stigma is going to be connected to the ovary via a style. So this style is just going to be this component here. Inside, or somewhere at the bottom, there may be an ovary that would later be part of the fruit, and the ovule that would later become the seed. So collectively, the stigma, style, ovary, and the ovule are going to generate what is referred to as the pistil, or sometimes the carpel of the flower, which is going to be the egg female component of the flower. So very generic. This is also a complete flower having both male and female components. And it's going to be a diagram of most of the flowers that you were going to find in books. So when we take this component or this drawing, and then we see this, there is nothing here that tells me it's a flower, or there's nothing here that is similar to anything from that diagram. But in fact, it has changed them completely. So this is a typical flower for members of the aroid family. And that is very important for you to understand, because the flowers are not going to change. You'll see a general makeup of them. Sometimes they may be lacking one or two things, but at least they're going to have the general component that will not change. Regardless of the environment, regardless of the stress, the flowers are not going to change, and they're always going to be there or similar. And that is what they have traditionally used to place members into this family group. And so here's a few other flowers just to show you, so that they're going to look very similar. So one, Philadelphia celoum, and two others right here, very similar, and makeup wise, they look very similar. So what are some of the things that we are looking at here? So there are important components that are unique to this family group. So the first thing is going to be something that is known as the spathae, which is going to be a bracte. That is a modified leaf that you may find in certain plants. The bracte is going to create this hood-like structure. The hood-like structure is going to probably protect the column inside from water. So it's going to act like a rain jacket. Or in other plants, it's going to act differently. So it's nothing more than a modified leaf covering what is known as the column or the spadix in our aroids. So that's going to be the central section that you see right now, that stick coming out of the flowers. So those are two unique parts associated with aroids that you only find them with aroids. And then when you start looking a little bit closer and we start cutting the underside, we're still going to find the spathae, the hood-like jacket. We have the spadix right here. And then below the spadix, we're going to find flowers that are not going to be bisexual or perfect, that they're only going to produce either pollen or an egg. And so right below the top of the spadix, we're going to have the male flowers that are going to produce pollen. And below that, we are going to have the female flowers, which only has a stigma and the ovary with the ovule. The male flowers only going to have stamens that are just going to produce pollen. And so we have a structure now, what is referred to as an inflorescence or a flower cluster, where you have male flowers and female flowers in the same structure, but separate from one another. And that is a very important component, because it's going to prevent what is referred to as selfing. So plants do not like to have the pollen from the same flower. They want to have the pollen from a different individual because that is what's going to bring genetic diversity. When you pollinate the plant from the same pollen, same flower, then eventually it is going to inbreed and cause other problems. So that is why some flowers opt for separating the flowers and making them receptive or shedding the pollen during different times, so that avoids puts a little bit of time in between the flowers so that it avoids the selfing. And so when we look at the close-up, outside the spadix, we have the male flowers, and you can see the pollen being shed by the flowers here. And then inside the spadix, we have the close-up of the female flowers, and you can see just the ovary with the white section. That is going to be the stigma, and then the style that eventually is going to lead inside to the ovule. So this would be the female and the male flowers for this plant. Here is a photograph of the Philodendron Celoum, the lacy tree philodendron. So those are going to be the male flowers, and below those are going to be the female. You can see a little bit of a difference between them. Later on, when the plant goes through the process of pollination and fertilization, that's going to be bringing then the fruit. And so each of the ovules here, the ones that were pollinated are then producing a seed, and that's why they have swollen and gotten bigger. And the ones that may have not gotten pollinated are not going to do anything, and you can see them kind of not growing at all. And so after time, when the plant has flowered, it has shed the pollen, it has also received the pollen. Now you have the spadix and the spathe that their function is done. It's no longer need them, so they wither and die. And now the energy is transferred over to the developing seeds within the fruit. And those are then going to be distributed by either animals or by wind or by some other means, so that the seeds can find a place to grow and become a new plant. And so we have anthurium here. And in this case, we have the fruits that are going to be very, very colorful, most likely to attract a bird. And the bird is going to eat the fruit, hopefully not digest the seeds. And when it goes to a different area, it's going to drop the seeds somewhere else. So birds will may disperse them. Or here's some of the fleshy fruits, either birds or some other mammal that may eat some of the sweet pulp, if that is the case, and either drop the seeds or eat them and then drop them somewhere else. So that's the fruit from a different philodendron type of plant. And there's the seeds. So the seeds are going to be hard. They can probably survive the intestine of an animal, and hopefully they'll land either on the ground where they won't germinate and allow the new plant to develop. So here is the developing fruit for the lacy tree philodendron. So the male flowers no longer needed, so those are the remnants of them, and the female flowers, which will now becoming the fruit for that specific plant. Here is Monstera deliciosa, and I mentioned before, consider every member of this family to be non-edible, except for Monstera deliciosa and a few other individuals that human ingenuity has allowed them to become safe and be able to eat them. So on the left, we have lacy tree philodendron. On the right, we have Monstera. So here they are side by side so that you can see the difference. And here's the flower for Monstera deliciosa. So we have the female flowers right here, and we have a nice hood, the spathe. And here is the fruit. I described it before as looking like a corn in the cob. So what is very important is if you're going to try to eat this fruit, make sure that it is fully ripened. Do not take any chances, which means that when you cut it, those shells or the covering on the fruit should be dropping off by themselves. If they're not dropping off by themselves, that's probably not ready for you to eat, and you may not like it. So allow them to fully ripen, if possible, on the vine or on the tree, on the plant. And when you start touch it and you see this covering drop, then you're welcome to take a bite out of the plant or out of the fruit. But be warned that there are crystals within this plant that is going to stab you in the throat, and it's not going to make it a pleasant experience. Is it good? Taste buds are different. It is referred to as a mixture of mango and pineapple and banana together. We find it, we'll try it. If not, I'll let you find one and then you tell me what you think about it. And so it is fleshy. The seeds would be inside if they're present, and if people look for it. It will require the plant to be an adult. So you have to have a philodendron that is many years old, allow it to grow big, and then you will get fruit on a regular basis. But it's not going to produce fruits on a tiny, tiny plant. And so what happens? Where are those crystals? Where are those toxins come from? So here's just a general diagram of a cell from a plant. And keeping in mind that plants do not really have a way of disposing of their biological waste like humans and or other animals do. Plants have to store it somewhere where it's going to be safe and away from the living components. And so many of you may remember from your high school biology that one of the big difference or the biggest difference between the cell of an animal and the cells of a plant is going to be the vacuole and the chlorophyll and a bunch of other things. But on plant cells, the vacuole is going to be much, much larger. And that is because the vacuole is used for storing a lot of the waste. It's used for storing a lot of the chemicals, either from biological waste or the defense mechanism for the plant. So when a plant is toxic, most likely the toxins are going to be found within the vacuole. The plant kind of puts them together in a package. The rest of the important organs are not swimming in this toxic compounds, and so it is safe for the plant. However, when you or when an animal takes a bite out of the plant, then they're going to bite into some of these vacuoles, bursting them, releasing the toxins, releasing whatever defense the plant might have. So that's where the toxins are going to be found. And with aroids, you're going to find what is known as raphides. These are the crystals, and obviously not my photograph, highly magnified. So they're microscopic crystals that the moment that somebody bites onto that plant, and burst those vacuoles, the crystals are just going to fly out. And they are going to be very, very sharp, stabbing you in the tongue, on the top of your throat, mouth, lower, and in your throat. And so with some of the plants, or with the casualties, when people have died because of eating some of these plants, it is because the crystals with an added poison are going to irritate the throat so badly that is going to cause it to swell. Once the throat begins to swell, then it's going to block the air passage, and the people will die out of suffocation, not so much the toxin itself. So here is the crystal, also highly magnified, and the chemical, it's going to be oxalic acid. So those are going to be the chemicals that you find within these plants that will cause the problems or that will poison you. So a combination of the oxalic acid with the crystal, the calcium oxalate crystals, it's a formula for defense, a mechanism for defense for the plants, which is a big problem for people. And then if we take just a list of the plants that the health department always every year they publish a list of the different toxin or the different cases that they've seen where people go to the hospital to be treated for some kind of toxicity. So you can look at the newest list for 2020 or maybe 2019. So we'll see a few things. We're going to find Spathophyllum, member of this family. Toxic, yes, that's going to be number 8. We're going to find Caladium, member of this family. Toxic, yes, no problem. We're going to have Philodendrons, number 13, member of this family, yes. Santadechia, which is Calla lily, member of this family, yes. Epipremnum, which is the pothos that we'll see later on, member of this family, yes. Some unknown plant, because doctors don't know plants, but they found the oxalate, the crystal calcium oxalate, probably guilty, member of this plant family, yes. So many of the plants that have caused or cause annual visits to the hospital because of poisoning are going to be members of this family. So just be aware of that. However, there is Monstera that is edible, and there's also this plant that many of them are going to have the common name of elephant ears because the leaves are going to look like ears of an elephant. And so we have Calocasia. Calocasia here growing by the river. This is Fullerton Arboretum in water. Or here I happen to find it at South Coast Botanic Garden growing in a container. So 2 different methods. There's the flower, typical of the aroid with the hood and the column in the middle. But over time, people have managed to figure out how to make it safe to eat. In the wild, they are toxic. When people started eating them, I'm sure they were toxic. How many people died before they figure out how to make it safe for somebody to eat? I don't know. However, it is cultivated commercially. So here's a photograph from Suriname where they're growing the plant. And here's some that are ready to be harvested. So here's in the market. So being sold as a leafy green that they will shred into pieces, almost like coleslaw. And if they saute it, if they cook it, that takes away the toxic components and makes it safe for people to eat and enjoy as a steam, it's not a steam, but a seasoned vegetable. And here's a different one. This is Trinidad and Tobago in the market where they were selling them. And I saw a lady chopping them up and they were selling already the pre-cut individuals. And here in some of our community gardens, we have people also cultivating them. So this has become a very popular plant to eat around here. Here's where they have already harvested some of the leaves and they're going to allow more to grow. If you take the underground structure, it is known as Taro. And so in Taro plants, people have figured out how to eat every single portion of the leaf, the stem, and even the underground structure, which is going to be known as a corm. So the taros that are sold in the stores as a starchy type of vegetable, it's safe to eat now, but before, again, it was probably dangerous. So those are the plants and the corms, and all you gotta do is just boil them with a little bit of salt. Boiling them takes away any of the remnants, if there's any remnants of the chemicals, and it's make good for you to eat. So then you can just enjoy like a potato, and not bad. If you never had them, you should. If you have, try different ways. If you want to plant them, this is when they already started to develop the roots and develop the new leaves, and they begin to grow. So here's the brand new roots for this taro. Here it is used in the landscape. So it's a great plant. I think it should be used a lot more for those edible type landscapes, if you ask me. There it is once again by the water feature or in the pond. And then you have what is known as giant taro. This is just a different species, also highly used by either Vietnamese or Cambodians or the people from Southeast Asia. It's a favorite vegetable to eat. So this one obviously bigger. Oh, and I forgot Hawaii, because Hawaii also eats poi, which is mainly crushed taro, which is the typical dish in Hawaii. and then you can jump over to every Polynesian islands all the way to Southeast Asia, which is the origin of a lot of these plants. So we have a much larger stem that can be eaten. Here it is when it's fresh, and then you peel it, chop it into pieces, and prepare it. Here it is holding one just for scale, so you can see the size. And then they harvest them from Southeast Asia. They vacuum seal them, put them in the fridge, and you can also buy it already ready to cook in the fridge section of some of the markets. Here it is where they have made taro crisps or chips, however you want to refer to it. They are very good. Here it is in what is known as a taro salad. Very, very, very good. Or my favorite is going to be taro pudding. Taro pudding with a little bit of coconut milk. Very, very good. And this is how it looks. It's better served when it's nice and warm on a cold day. It's perfect. And that's how it looks when you finish it for taking a photograph of how it looks underneath it. So taro pudding, if you've never had it, you should try it because it is very, 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 very good. And then we have taro bread, very good, especially if you have some coffee. And there's some taro mochi like bread as well. So many products that are being made with taro. And then you have malanga, which is a different individual that is also eaten. It's eaten for the underground stems. Malanga there from the store, and you can see the stems. And also very simple, just boil it with a little bit of water. And you can probably prepare it with a couple of other spices. But if you just want to try it, it's very starchy like potatoes as well. And even the leaves on some of this, you have to cook them. You cannot eat them raw. But the leaves are sold at many of the local markets. And I was amazed because I've always considered this plant to be highly toxic and one of those things that you don't eat. And then I started seeing this and like, wow. Uh, so it's amazing, but people do eat these kinds of things. As mentioned before, the leaves are going to change on many of these philodendrons from the juvenile to the adult. And so here are other examples. So here it's a juvenile, uh, almost a press to the stem. And it is a leaf that you see there. It's carrying out photosynthesis with the small amount of light that is getting at the space of the canopy or the forest, and then it's going to climb. So they're going to germinate in the ground, kind of feel their way for a tree, find a tree, start to climb, and up it goes. Eventually, as it gets more light, then it's going to start to develop those older leaves and a lot bigger. And then eventually they may split. So splitting is a common thing with a lot of the adult leaves on member of the aroids. And so we've seen Swiss cheese plant, Monstera, that the adult leaves are split. And splitting is going to prevent the leaves from shredding during the rain. Also, the leaves are going to act as a pathway. They're going to guide the water. So when the water hits the top of the leaf, you can see the main veins that are going to channel the water the plant wants it, and that's going to be probably by its root. So the leaves, that having the big leaves, acts as an umbrella or as a catch basin, and then channeling the water.
We lost you, Professor. It froze. Uh-oh, we lost them. Hello? All right, Anthony, what do you got for us? That's funny. You don't know that. You never know what people like or don't like. All right. Well, this is Lily Poppy. She's old. She's grumpy. Sometimes she's nice, but most of the time not.
All right, let's come back. It just dropped me and took a while for me to get back in. All right, so let's pick up where we left. So channeling the water, very, very important. Also allowing for the light to go through. So remember, light is very important for plants. So if this big philodendron leaves was complete and was not shredding, then it would probably shade all the leaves underneath it and from the same plant. And then it's not going to have enough surface. So it allows the plant to still have very large leaves and also be able to allow some of the light to keep on filtering towards the bottom. And so here's the sample. Next time I'll take some video, but this is a little bit old, where I took the hose and I literally put some water on the leaves, kind of simulating rain. And you can see it being channeled through the veins, and especially on your philodendron, the tree philodendron, channel it to the ground where the roots are located. So that's very important. And so when you start looking up at the canopy here's in the wild, you can see some of the leaves as they are beginning to naturally shred and one on top of the other. So that ensures that the bottom foliage is also going to be getting some of that light. And here's looking up. So you see the leaves on top of each other and you still see some good lighting going all the way to the bottom. And here's just a cluster of different leaves from the same plant on top of one another. and you're able to see through. There's little pockets here and there where you can see all the way to the sky. So it's important for the plant to be able to have this. And so here's just an example, just extreme shredding. So still has enough surface to survive. And then you have a couple of the larger ones that are going to be those giant elephant ears that are very important for you to know. Because if for some reason you get caught naked in the forest or in the jungle, then just take one of those. It will definitely cover you. Or if you get caught on a rainstorm without an umbrella in the rainforest, that can definitely act as a very good umbrella for you to keep the rain away. So there's just for scale with a person, the size of the leaf for some of this. And then we have some of the anthuriums that have the drip tip. So I mentioned the tip of the plant has a drip that is kind of going to guide the water. But it's also very common for members of this family to exhibit what is known as guttation, which means dripping water from the tip. And it is a defense mechanism. So keep in mind, there's a lot of water in the forest. There's a lot of water in the tropical rainforest. And so if the water pressure is high and plants keeps absorbing water, there may be a point when too much water is going to be absorbed and it may burst some of the plant. So the plants are going to naturally drop excess water from the tips, which is important for you to know because if you take a philodendron and you put it in your house and you put it on top of expensive furniture or close to electrical equipment, the plant may drop some droplets of water onto that and it might not end up well. So just make a note of that, that members of this family have guttation or through the drip tip, they may over time just drop some water and some people don't understand where it's coming from, but it is from the plant. And then here's the flowers for this anthuriums. And just to show you how high some of those plants can grow or how long those roots can reach. There I am for scale, just one lonely tree, probably from the original forest back in the days. And you can follow it. The top is completely covered with epiphytes, so all those plants that are growing on top. And you can see towards the base where I took a photograph of some of the roots that have reached the ground. And where I have my hands is where I'm also holding a few of the roots that are getting to the bottom of or to the floor of that. So very long, very tall trees. The pollination is going to be through insects. And the other important job of the spadix that I want to mention is that often is going to heat up or cause some kind of heat. Now, some of the members that are native to cold countries, like the skunk cabbage, is going to heat up and it's going to exude a stench that is going to let animals know that the flower is open from several miles. Or in cold climate, it may provide the insects a nice, warm, toasty area for them to relax. In the process, they'll pollinate the flower. So be aware of that. The temperature, increasing of temperature is noticeable within members of this family, and that's going to be by the spadix. So what the plant wants is for the animal to go through there. If it's the pollen is being shed, the animal is going to carry the pollen, hopefully to a different flower. Or on the second day, when the female flowers are receptive, then animals are going to come in, hopefully bringing pollen from a different flowers. And here's just a infrared of the temperature, and you can see the spadix having a much hotter temperature than the rest of the flowers. So that's going to be important for the fragrance or also for providing that warm, toasty area for philodendrons, for insects. And here's some of the plants that have evolved to be pollinated by flies. And so, I mean, they're dark purple in color. And it kind of resemble blotches of decaying blood. So yes, in nature, the plant is trying to fool the flies, thinking that this is a rotten animal. So you think about a rotten animal or a dead animal, eventually the circulatory system is non-functional. The blood just spills and spews into the tissue, creating necrosis and eventually stench, which is what the plant wants to simulate. And so here, the spathe that bragged has those purple blotches to, again, to an animal that's going to look like a rotten carcass. And the smell is going to be the same. It's going to be of a dead mouse, a dead animal, something really horrible. So just be aware of this. These are really nice, very unusual, but they're trying to attract a fly to pollinate this. The most common is going to be the corpse flower, Amorphophallus. Corpse flower because apparently it smells like a dead body of a person. And the smell can be detected for miles because it is very unusual for them to flower. I think they're native to Borneo. Uh, and so there might be a flower here and a flower for several miles. And the insects are going to be scattered around. So the plant is going to send out this stench for many miles, and beetles that would normally eat also flesh would go and find the flower thinking that it's a dead animal, and they'll take the pollen to the next flower. So the Huntington Library is known to have flowered this individual in the ground. Most people will grow it in containers. Many years ago, it became the big item. People would buy them through eBay left and right. And the Fullerton Arboretum was one of the first ones to ever flower in container. So no leaves, they go dormant. And out of the corm, you have the beginnings of those, the flower, the spadix and the spathe. And then if it gets pollinated, then you will get the fruit. And here's as it's getting bigger. And here's when it finally opened with two of my friends, Chris Barnhill here. And so this is going to be one of the biggest flower clusters, not a flower, because remember the flowers are going to be tiny, but the flower cluster of a group of flower. Coarse flower, Amorphophallus, and here's the fruits showing you the remnants of the stigma and now the ovary that is mature. And again, people were buying them left and right. I have a friend who grew a bunch of them, and later on he couldn't sell them because everybody was, the market was saturated with some of this. So Amorphophallus is a different genus, and there's the corm for this individual. And then you have cognac. This is Amorphophallus cognac, and it was sold or is being sold as the next best thing for losing weight. So it's nothing more than the starch from a different species, the Amorphophallus cognac, and you eat it, and the starch kind of fills your stomach, and that way it makes you eat less and makes sure that you don't lose your waistline. It's out there if you want to try it. It's nothing more than just a undigestible starch that fills you up. And then from Sardinia, the island off of Italy, you have what is known as the dead horse arum. And that is because it smells like a dead horse. It's wants to attract flies because in the island there's going to be many seagulls that will die, and so it's going to fool some of the flies to think that this looks like a dead seagull. This is growing in the Fullerton Arboretum, and you see the flies. So it stinks, and the flies are going to immediately go to it, and you see some hair-like protrusions coming from the spadix, and just in the mimic of that tissue. And looking very close, you even see some hair-like, so kind of like an arm, kind of like a small hair from a mammal. And inside, you have the flies. So the flies will normally look for crevices inside dead corpses, and that's where they're going to lay their eggs. And thinking that this is a dead animal, the flies are going to go inside, come in contact with the reproductive structures of the flowers, and they will lay their eggs, but there's nothing for the maggots to eat, so they'll die. So it's a one way for the plant in a way. And then around the city, you may see aristema, sometimes referred to as jack in the pulpit. I know why that is, but there's the flower, nothing more than the same thing that we've seen for the other. Or anthuriums, flamingo flowers. We'll get to see this one later on. Very colorful, houseplant, very popular. Anthurium andrianum. Nothing more than a bright, showy spadix with a spathe and different colors that are available. And here's some of the wild anthuriums. This one growing just in the roof of a shed in Trinidad and Tobago with the flowers and the fruits. And this one growing at the Huntington Library with the spadix right there and spathe. And I don't think this one has flowers. Or if you happen to venture out into Sherman Library, it is a very nice small garden to see. There's collections. So here's a hanging basket, and there I am for scale to show you the length of those leaves. So some of them could be quite nice. And the flowers themselves is not that attractive, but the leaves are definitely attractive. Some of them that are going to be dark in color, such as this almost purple black color spathe. And just in the wild, just crawling through some of the side of the cliffs. Here is on the ground. Or this is probably Colombia, where I happen to find this individual, and just for scale, you can see there with the flowers for this individual, and the very, very large leaves. And some of them, that the leaves were the showy component, so they fooled me thinking that it's a passion flower, caught my eyes, but it's nothing more than the colorful leaves that are young, and as they are mature, then they're going to turn green and lose that coloration. But the flowers are quite nice for this individual. And a philodendron here that I found in the wild with its flower right there. And a small one, so small anthurium here, very tiny flower right there. And with fruit, also in Colombia there. And by the way, I do not sample these fruits because I know we're probably gonna regret it. And then here's also a different one with the male and the females already there. At Bogota Botanic Garden, so here they are being used in the landscape with those gigantic leaves. And here they are by themselves in the middle of the lawn. And in containers, here's the individuals with the very, very large flowers and leaves and fruit. And some of them are going to be striped. Some of them may look like zebras. So be aware and be ready. The calla lily, different forms. Most likely the white that you may have seen for funerals. So it is popular for funeral, the flower. Here you see the yellow spadix with the white pollen that is being shed. And here's some of the pink forms that you might see out there at Home Depot or your garden center, pink and yellows and a bunch of others. Here's some of the purple ones that I think I saw in somebody's house. And some of the yellows from Armstrong or Lowe's. I think this is Lowe's, and pinks. And then Halloween is coming. So this one is the voodoo calla lily that I saw at H&H one year, right before Halloween. Obviously, a lot of people are looking for the black flowers, and this one is it. Caladium, we'll see it later. Very colorful for the foliage. So again, foliage only. Here's an assortment of them that you may see around here. And here's some more. Or Spathophyllum. Here's a Callisto nursery that is no longer in business. The owner retired, but he grew thousands upon thousands of caladiums. And there's some of the plants with the spadix and some of the nicer specimens. So we'll get to see some of this later in the semester. Dracunculus, black calla lily, as is referred to, and or epipremnum. The pothos, we'll get to see it later on. But once again, people grow this plant or have grown it for many years. The leaves are small, the leaves are cutesy. Get it in the ground and let it grow, because as it grows, the leaves are gonna get gigantic as well. So most people have never seen or do not realize that the leaves are gonna get big. And this is, I think this is close to Willow and Santa Fe. This is where this house is, so that somebody put it in the ground. And there's my hand for scale next to that big pothos leaves. And in the tropics, it can grow wild. So here is pothos planted in the ground. And if you look towards the top, when it gets big, the leaves are also going to naturally split, and they're going to look like a colorful monstera. The splitting of the leaves has not been seen by many people, even though they have grown it for years, because they keep it as a juvenile plant. But get it in the ground, let it get big, let it become adult, and it can become like this, and it's going to be very, very different from the cutesy pothos that we'll see later on. Used as a ground cover, and it merits more attention. Here it is, just covering the ground and looking green and quite attractive right there. And use in the landscape. So I mentioned containers. This is an airport that has pothos with cast iron. Later on, we'll see aglonema, and at the airport being used as a divider. And there's the flowers that people don't see, but they're there. African mask, we'll see later on with its flower there. And the ZZ plant, I mentioned it belongs to this category. Here it is from Callisto, when he used to grow a lot of them. And there's the flowers. So has a spathe, has a spadix. It looks like a member of this family because it is. Obviously, the flowers are inconspicuous or not really showy. They're greenish like the rest of the plant, but it's a member of this family. And I share this with you, Xanadu. So it is in canvas, being used in the landscape in a raised container bed underneath trees. I think this is by Ocean Boulevard here in Long Beach. And here's the close-up of those leaves for Xanadu. And here's also Xanadu. I think this is by 2nd Street and PCH next to the Acapulco. And some of the other allocations that are going to be very fragrant. This one here that we've grown before with the fruit. And then Dieffenbachia, commonly known as dumb cane, because you're going to be very dumb if you're going to bite into them. And fortunately, this will be one that has caused many, many people to go to the hospital. Variegated aroids. So here's one with yellow variegation. And we mentioned that Monstera deliciosa with the white stripes, or here with the gold and yellow stripes. That is very, very expensive. So right here, there's a lot of money. Happened to visit a friend who collects nothing but variegated plants. And so here's one variegation or one form. And here's the white variegated that is very sought after by people. And I think that is the last slide. So sorry for that minor glitch. Are there any questions on the aroids? All right, then I will stop the recording. I will